Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with G Wright, who's a former tour manager and sound engineer, and is now part of All Things Relax Studios. G, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I'm excited.
Absolutely. We were talking before we started recording, and I reached out to you, wanted to get you on the show because you did a thing that I wanted to do right out of high school. I went to a recording school in small town Chillicothe, Ohio, and thought I was going to be a sound engineer and traveling all over the world, and then kind of derailed that a little bit and got into the regular working world, and now I guess I'm living that travel dream vicariously, just without the bands and the soundboard and the mixing board and all that sort of stuff. So really appreciate you being on the show. Tell me a little bit about, how did you get into, sound engineering, and, when was it that you first got into it? How long were you into it?
So ever since I was a little kid growing up, I wanted to be a radio DJ, and I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my hero, Casey Kasem.
Yeah.
So when I turned 16, I actually auditioned at a radio station, a top 40 radio station. And I became, at the time, one of the youngest radio DJs in the country with a FCC license. So I was going down this path of where I'm going to do radio. I love it. Talking into mic, reaching people. I was Elvis in the parade. It was so much fun, right? Then at 18, when I graduated high school, I got an opportunity to go out with a group called Recreation, which is a USO type tour. And we performed at veterans hospitals all throughout the country. So when I was out touring and seeing 48 of the 50 states, I ended up sneaking into a Whitney Houston concert and meeting her tour manager and meeting her front of house engineer and watching the show and having her vocal right in the headphones. And I was like, that's it. This is it. So I was on that path, at like 18. And like you, I went to a recording school. I went to Full Sail down in Florida. And then from there, just, it's one of those things, like touring is fun, but learning the technology of how sound works and everything, it was like putting it all together. And my very first gig out of school was working at Dollywood, mixing shows out there. So I came right out of school, right into theme park, and mixing the same show over and over again, like 5-7 times a day. And then from there, it just took off, 25 years later. And now we're here.
Yeah. And, just tell me a little bit about, how the technology has changed. Because like I said, I had gone to recording school in '87, so we were still all analog. MIDI was just being introduced at the time, and CDs were just coming out. How tough was it for you to kind of stay with that learning curve from analog to digital, and even now, man, it's just changing. How can you keep up with it now? It's changing every day.
That's a good point. I mean, on that Recreation tour, I was running the music on DAT. Do you remember DAT, Dan? It looked like a little VCR thing. It was about the size of like a mini cassette.
Yeah.
But it was digital audio, but it still was a tape. So it would still misfire sometimes. It was like everyone was using CDs, and starting to burn CDs. And in the commercial world, we were using DAT tapes. And man, if you lost a DAT tape, you lost the shows. It was like a tiny, tiny little, like, it looked like a VHS tape. But yeah, the thing with going from analog to digital, and I guess in this way, I'd be kind of an old school guy. I kind of fought the technology at first because I still like the way analog boards sounded, like a Soundcraft or a Ramza or a Gamble. I mean, we're talking the really big ones, like that, you need a stepladder to get to the top of the, I had a stool that I'd reach to get up to the top of the board. But there was something about the way, sound through analog just sounded better. But then the technology got better and better. And all of a sudden, digital became the way to go because you could do so much more with digital. Back in analog days, as you can remember, you had to have like racks and stacks of every compressor and EQ and, gate and reverb delay, all, like, if you needed 10 of them, you needed 10 units. Now with digital boards, which it did take some learning curve, that happened a long time ago, but with digital boards, now you can have anything you want right there and automate it. So it's a learning curve, but it's kind of like I still prefer vinyl over CD. You know what I'm saying? The
Right.
sound of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was that was one of the things that I got, when we downsized to live in the RV, sold my
Mm-hmm.
vinyl collection.
Oh
That
man.
was that was one of the things that, people always ask what was it that, was tough about downsizing. And, now that we're having this conversation, that might have been one of my most difficult things, is having to get rid of my vinyl collection, because that
Oh
definitely wasn't
man.
going to travel well in the
Oh
RV. But
yeah.
nonetheless, I was happy with what I got for it. But
Yeah.
so from Dollywood,
Mm-hmm.
where did you go from there, and how long were you at
I
Dollywood?
I was at Dollywood for a season, and then I was mixing a show, and a guy, I think he was the tour manager for Conway Twitty. I think it was Conway Twitty. This was like one of his last shows before he passed away. He came over and he says, "Hey, you're pretty good. You ever think of moving to Nashville and do this and go out with country acts and go on tour?" And so I moved to Nashville, and my very first gig there was going out with, I'm dating myself here, Dan, but going out with Barbara Mandrell, wiring stages for her. And it was like anything in any business. You have to start at learning and the training. And then I had to learn, how sound worked. I had to learn how cables, wiring stages. And, this is when in-ear technology was just coming out. So that was a whole other thing you had to get used to, because you could literally walk out on stage in the middle of the show and not know that the band was playing if the front of house was muted.
Right.
So it was, and that's when the technology, digital boards were starting to come out. So, and one thing led to another, and I just kept, doing everything I could. And, I delivered steak out in Nashville, where, it was like a really good steaks you could get delivered. And I delivered all over Music Row, and I'd be dropping off resumes everywhere. And before you know it, I'd walk into some studio and they go, hey, kid, because I was young, and they're like, "Hey, kid, you want to, what are you doing? You want to go out and mix this country act?" And I'm like, yeah, why not? So it's just, and it just led from that to, and then eventually moving to LA and getting into rock and doing pop and all these things. The acts got bigger, but the the fun of it kind of stayed the same, because like I still prefer, like, going back in the day, taking an unknown band that nobody's heard of and taking them out and just giving them a great sounding show and a great tour, knowing that, okay, 6 months from now these guys are going to be on that stage.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we do with Rockstar, is
Yeah.
taking that technology and plugging it in.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I'll go to a show now, and like I'm always, I view things a lot differently, because I am
Mm-hmm.
always looking at the engineer, and just like it, just putting on a show. I don't think the average, music fan understands everything that goes on to make that show happen.
Yeah.
So tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about, you know, concert night. What
Okay.
time are you getting to the venue? Just to, again, give the listeners a little bit of idea. They're showing up at 7 o'clock,
Oh
for the
yeah.
show to start at 7:30. They might have been partying in the parking lot since 4 or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But when does it start for you guys?
I mean, for a club show, it could be they load in the afternoon or something. But for like a big arena tour, like when I was out on the Jonas Brothers tour with a band called Honor Society, and that was 20. How many was it? It was like 22 buses, 20 semis, and a jet. And somehow, and I was a tour manager and front of house engineer for the support act, so I had that responsibility. I did not have the responsibility of maintaining 200 touring staff, but somehow they would set up this huge arena, 150-foot stage with a water curtain, with a hydraulic crane, with turntables and 30 tons of sound and lighting and video in the air. And they would do that all in a day and tear it down in a day. So yeah, for people that go to shows, the crew is coming in there in the morning at like anywhere from 6 or 7 a.m. and they're working nonstop. The band like loading in for backline, like the instruments and things like that, and bands doing sound checks and things that could be 3 or 4 in the afternoon. But by the time the audience gets to the show, our job better be done. Because as soon as they walk in and they get their seat and that house lights go down, that music kicks in, everything has to be right. And if it's not, then, we've got some backup plans. But it takes an entire city to take care of an artist on the road. And I think that's something a lot of people may not realize, is that there's a lot of behind the scenes work.
Yeah.
Going on.
I mean, just that entourage that you just
Yeah.
explained is phenomenal to understand, like that,
Yeah.
just the moving parts of it.
Yeah.
So I always look at things a little differently because, I did, throughout my career in the nonprofit world, we ran a lot of events. Granted, they were, baseball and softball tournaments and stuff like that. But again, there's so many moving parts that people don't comprehend when they're there. And so I always look at things differently in that way. So, obviously you have an incredible love for music. Are you a musician as well?
I played trumpet back in high school, but I've always joked about this. I can't tune a guitar, but I can make a guitar sound great. So I think there's a different skill level there. There's some people that are really good at making music. And if that's what they're doing, then they should focus on that. There's people that are really good at producing music, usually have a music background, but then there's other people that are really good at making music or technology or video or whatever sound or look great, that maybe don't have the skill of, playing a guitar. But I know the frequencies I want, and depending on how the person is playing the guitar, depending on the venue, the amp they're using, pedals and all that, I know the tone that I want from it by listening to their record and going, okay, this is the tone they want. And I know how to take that and use the technology to, But you're making me miss doing sound. I haven't done sound in a couple of years, but it is fun to go out to clubs and just find a local band and just be like, hey guys, I just want to mix you guys and make you sound great. And they'll be like, okay, cool. It's like, I should do that again.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, cause I played a little bit of bass when I was in high school and didn't keep up with it. Currently I'll, dabble around in the harmonica, but that's the extent of my.
Hey, the harp, man. That's awesome. I love the harp.
But just listening to music, it always just, it spoke to me, it intrigued me. So what was it for you just about music in general that, kind of spoke to your soul, so to speak, that made you want to get into the industry?
The energy of the crowd when you go to the show, like you said, no one knows all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And there were days when it's like, oh, this show isn't going to happen. We're so far behind, or there's a production problem or something. But the energy of when everything comes together and the lights go down and your artist is on stage and the crowd is just loving it. And the energy the crowd gives back to the artist. And we talk about this in Rockstar, is that they're storytellers, right? They're sharing a story through music and they're connecting with their audience, and the audience is giving it back to them. And that energy, it's hard to describe, but when you're at the soundboard or at side stage and you see it and feel it, it's like, okay, I can get used to this. It makes all the drama you may have dealt with in the daytime, or all the pain you went through to get this to happen, it all makes sense whenever you get that, the audience is like, man, that was a great show.
Yeah.
And you don't want to tell them, like, you have no idea what was going on behind stage, that, it almost didn't happen, and they don't care, and they don't need to care either. It's our job in behind the scenes to get everything going for them so that they can enjoy it.
Yeah, we always had a terminology that it was organized chaos during our events.
Absolutely.
Just like you said, nobody knows that, somebody's frantically trying to get these two wires connected so everything goes off without a hitch.
Yes,
it's incredible, and there's a adrenaline that goes with that, and when you see it come together, it's pretty cool. And obviously, you have a pretty wide taste of music as well. You said you started out in country and then you went to pop, and I'm the same way. I mean, on the show, I've interviewed, country artists, I've interviewed folk artists, I interviewed classic artists, I've interviewed hip hop artists. So, what is it about all the different genres that really, kind of draws you to music, and, that you can listen to a country artist and,
Mm-hmm.
uh, hard rock artist on the same playlist and not miss a beat?
That's a great question. I'm thinking like a lot of it has to do with the fact that somebody really spent a lot of time putting this together, right? Like that this is their story. But it goes in when I listen to music, I hear it. I don't know how to say this. I hear it differently than I think other people do. I pick up on certain instruments right away. So for me, it's always the bass guitar or the bass line of the song, regardless of what it is. That's what sets the foundation and the groove, and then the drums, and then the guitars and the keyboards. And if it's country, it's that steel and fiddle. And it's like putting it all together, like I talk about in Rockstar, like having a nest and having a firm foundation, and then creating this mix of where the vocal just sits in, like in jazz terms, right, in the pocket, and when it
Yeah.
sits in the pocket. So it's the same thing for, hip hop or R&B especially. My God, the bass line on it is just incredible. But even with a hip hop artist, or a rapper, it's about creating that pocket to where the vocal can sit right into the pocket. So it's being able to hear that production, that producer, the engineer, the producer that put it together, that, yeah, it's hard to say like, oh, well, I like country, I like rock, I like pop. I love the 80s. I love like what they were doing with the keyboards, you know what I mean? And MIDI, like you were talking about MIDI before. Like, I mean, there's a tone to it, there's a feeling to it. So I like that, like over in Europe, when in radio, they'll just play music. In UK and Europe, they'll just play music. They'll play the Beatles, and then they play Madonna, and then they'll play something else. Right? They don't really compartmentalize it, so it's just great music, and that's how I feel about the music. Yeah.
No, I love it. And again, you look
Yeah.
like at a band like Chicago, who had
Oh.
this whole horn section in a
Oh my
rock
God.
and roll
Yes.
band. Like,
Yes.
who thought of
Yes.
that? Like, who thought of that?
Yes.
But it sounds
Peter
amazing.
Cetera.
Yes,
Yes.
it's incredible. So,
Yeah.
was all of your experience in live engineering, or did you do some studio engineering as well and produce some stuff as well?
I focused on live. I did like studio stuff, was like maybe some TV things, but I was always brought up on that I get one chance to make it sound good.
Yeah.
So I was very comfortable in the live environment. I have a lot of friends that took the path of the studio, and now they've got the Grammys, and they've got, producer of the year and all that. But I always loved the live because it's traveling and seeing different cities and different venues and different audiences, and I like being around people and seeing the reaction
Yeah.
of the music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously I can relate to that with traveling now.
Yeah.
So, you were relatively young
Yeah.
when you hit the road and were traveling around with these bands. I mean, what was
Yeah.
that experience like for you, and how did that mold you into the human being you are today?
That's a great question. I think it was, well, because like I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, and I used to have a map of the United States on my wall. And I would tell my parents growing up that I'm going to go see all these states and all these cities and everything. They're like, that's nice, go to college, And then before I went to college, I actually got that tour, the recreation tour, where I went and saw the country. And what I realized is that this country is much bigger than we realize,
God,
but
yeah.
yet much smaller.
Yep.
Like the people you meet and the culture that you see and the food, my God, the food is just incredible. So like you combine that traveling with getting to do shows that, you're getting that audience participation. I mean, I would say probably, Dan, the best thing about travel for me was food. I love the food all over the country. Steak in Texas, barbecue in Alabama is different than barbecue in Kansas. Sushi in Seattle is different than sushi in Miami. It's like, so good.
Yeah, and it is incredible. I mean, we
Yeah.
have so many different cultures right here in our own country that I don't think
Yeah.
most people actually realize or appreciate, for sure. So that it's so cool to kind of And I could talk, this could turn into one of those Joe Rogan 3-hour podcasts, but
3-hour podcast.
We'll keep it ratcheted back though.
And we're going to catch up offline too, or off camera, because I really think what you guys are doing is awesome. You guys are living that rock star lifestyle. You're just like, okay, we're going where we want to go. We're going to do what we want to do. I mean, that is awesome. It really is.
We love it. I mean, we absolutely love it. Have no regrets on what we're doing at all. So, so tell me about what you're doing today. You mentioned a couple times about rock stars, and I mentioned in the beginning that you've got All Things Relax Studios. So tell me a little bit about what is rock stars, what is All Things Relax Studios.
So All Things Relax Studios is our production company. It started with my partner Sandi D, the queen of Podcast Zen. She had a blog called All Things Relax, where she would share wellness and self-care tips and things. And she built up quite a good audience around the world where, she was reaching out to these women. So we decided to launch the podcast, which is All Things Relax with Sandi D podcast. Now, the thing here is that Sandi's an introvert Virgo. I'm an extrovert Gemini. I have no problem talking on the mic. And she was terrified of public speaking. So she had to overcome that fear of public speaking to really launch the podcast. So we worked together, and she's my partner, and I fell in love with her and all that. And we worked together where I'm like, okay, we can take these same techniques that these artists use before they go on stage, before they do an interview, and we can incorporate them into you doing your show. So we worked on vocal techniques. We worked on, mindset and breathing techniques and all this stuff, and really getting into know the why you do what you do. And so we launched the podcast, and I still am the producer of it. I'm behind the scenes. Then over this past New Year's, it kind of dawned on us as we're doing our vision board. We had, rock star and media training, and we're like, wait a minute, now we need to take this that we've, learned from her launching the podcast, so that we can use that to help coaches and authors and creative entrepreneurs. So what Rockstar is we show them how to speak with confidence and clarity. We show them how to have a crystal clear message and connect with their audience by being their authentic selves. So that's why we created the Rockstar media training, to help people. So when they do go on interviews, or they're going on TV, or they're standing in front of people, performing at a show, they have the confidence to really just channel their inner rock star.
I love that. And I can relate to that because I'm an introvert as well. And I do public speaking.
Really?
And
really?
for many years, if I knew I was going to speak, I could not eat prior to speaking, because if I would eat, I literally felt like I was going to throw up. God. We would do a banquet, and I wasn't even like a keynote speaker. I'm kind of like the quasi MC, and people would come up to me, and I got a full plate of food, and my wife knew what was going on, and they'd be like, "Oh, why aren't you eating?" I'm like, I can't eat because I'm going to get up there on stage, and I'm going to feel like I'm going to, have to throw up.
Oh my God.
It's gotten so much better now. And it really had just kind of, became, part of just training yourself, to understand it. So I can actually eat before I speak now, but it's funny. You hear that about a lot of, even musicians who, they literally are scared to death. And then all of a sudden it's like they feed off that energy from the crowd once they get out there performing. And I think from speaking, it's the same thing, so when I get out there, I'm always, looking to make contact with my audience, eye contact with my audience, because I kind of feed off of that when I can see someone who's like nodding their head, or you can kind of, connect with them emotionally. And I think that's what's helped me get over that. So I think that's pretty cool what you guys are doing there to help people get over that. So I can definitely relate to it. So, what was it that, kind of made you want to give back? I mean, because that's what you're doing in this, granted it's a business, but it's really a business to help other people. So what was it that made you want to do that and give back to others?
Thanks for that compliment, by the way. We see a lot of people are following trends. A lot of people are trying to, follow the vanity metrics, the And I think what the pandemic showed us too is that we have the technology to reach people all over the world, like we are right now on this podcast and in our studio and, in the RV with the camera and everything. Right. But I think what is missing is that personal connection.
Yeah.
I think if we're following trends and doing what the latest trend is, then we're getting kind of, mixed in with everybody else. So what we're here to do is that everybody has a voice and it deserves to be heard. Everybody's a storyteller. I mean, the story that you and Sandi are doing, traveling the country, is so powerful. And now you have ways to get that story out there. So instead of following trends, really just embrace who you are and use this technology to cut through all the noise and all the trending dances and whatever, all that. Maybe I'm too old for it, Dan, but it's like business is business. People want to talk to people directly, even if they can't physically in the same room. We have the technology now where we can talk to people all over the world. And that's why we're here doing this, to really help people get that confidence so they can,
Yeah. And I
channel their
love
inner
that.
rock star,
That's,
right?
yeah.
Man.
And that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I, wanted to podcast while we traveled. I mean, I actually started
Yes.
podcasting, for our organization back in 2012. And it was really just a way for us to kind of get sponsors in and talk about why they
Mhm.
supported the organization and get some of our alumni in and that sort of thing. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed, telling the stories. And the journey of my mother's son, it's inspired by
Mhm.
my mom, who in the mid 80s decided to do what we're doing in a very different way. She took an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant, yanked the
The
back seat out
Valiant?
of it,
No
put
way.
a sheet of plywood in there and a mattress, and she just took off and traveled
Yeah.
around, doing her gypsy thing.
Yeah.
And when she passed away, I remember going through her
Yeah.
journal and reading the stories about the people she met, just like what we were talking about when you were out on tour. I mean, all these incredible
Yeah.
stories she had. And it just, when we got the inspiration to, follow in her footsteps per se,
Yeah.
I said to Sandi, I said, how cool would it be if when mom did this in the mid 80s, if she had this social media platform to share these stories as opposed to, reading these handwritten notes, which were very cool, kid you not, about
Yeah.
reading those notes. But it's just different to kind of do it and share it in real time. And that's what
Yeah.
we wanted to do. We wanted to do that. And I agree with you where I think everybody's got a story to tell.
Yep.
And they can all be very inspiring. And that's, that again falls into place of the subtitle of the podcast, Many Little People in Many Little Places, because
Yeah.
there's so many incredible people out there who have great stories to tell. And that was the reason, to do the podcast. And now, again, through evolving with technology, not only are we able to, tell the stories of people that we, meet face to face on these travels, but now I can reach out
Mm.
and
Yep.
connect with people like you. And, maybe someday we will meet face to face when we're
We'll
going
meet
through
face to
state
face.
college.
We'll go have barbecue somewhere in the South or something. Oh, in State College. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Definitely, kind of the reason why I wanted to do the podcast and have, people like yourself on, as well as the people that we meet in the travels. So I love that concept of, at the end of the day, we are all storytellers. And even if you're
Yeah.
an introvert or an extrovert, you have a story to tell. And it's just a matter of getting beyond that fear of how you can, you can tell it. So how long, from the time you guys were doing it with your own podcast, how long did it take to evolve and say, hey, we can, do this and coach other people through this and be able to make them their own rock stars?
We launched the podcast. We're coming up on season 3. I think it was earlier this year that we decided about the media training. We had a course where we were teaching people how to podcast, and then we realized that, because we were showing like audition and how to use compression and EQ and all this, and with our market research, realized that a lot of people weren't taking the the professional studio, like, okay, I'm going to use all these plugins and I'm going to use all this compression and EQ and all this. And it was very technical. So we found that a lot of people were like, well, let's just streamline it down to, what, and we did market research. Well, what is it people need? Well, people need to feel confident about themselves. And if they're promoting their business, they need to know why they do it. And they need to be able to put together a crystal clear message. And just by them being their authentic selves and letting people know, like what you guys are doing, being your authentic selves, you're inspiring so many people. You're affecting so many lives. You're like giving ideas to people. You're making people remember things. You're like, you know what? Maybe we do that instead of the, like it's, and like you said, with your mom documenting the journey, you got this great documentation that's around forever. And this is awesome. 5 years, 10 years from now, you look back and go, man, we did a lot of stuff back then. I wish we had that technology back when I was touring, because I didn't really take photos. I didn't take videos of cities. It was just so like every day it was like, oh, no big deal. I'll be in Paris tomorrow. So it doesn't matter like taking photos. And now with the technology, documenting it like this and just reaching people, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing you mentioned there was, people's whys. And that's something that, when I still ran the nonprofit, was something that we would go over with our staff quite a bit, because, we're serving youth, and, it was bigger than just our staff collecting the paycheck and all that sort of stuff. So many times in staff meetings, we would revisit, what the why was of the organization. So what is your why for All Things Relax Studios and Rock Stars?
I would say that we're here to help, people discover and develop that rock star in them, the X factor. There's something unique everybody has. And sometimes it takes working with somebody, a coach or a mentor or somebody, to really identify it for them. Like, one of our clients, when we're doing the SWOT analysis, where we sit down and talk about strengths and weaknesses. And one of the clients, she said one of her weaknesses was that she has so many projects. And we look at it as, that's not a weakness. That's a big strength. So you've got like 5 different things you want to do. How can you sit down and take these 5 things and combine them? Or what is the overall message that connects all 5 of these? Like, I think as entrepreneurs, as business owners, we can be too close to what we're doing. And when we're able to sit down and share it with somebody else and get their perspective on it, and then once you understand what your why is, then everything else gets built around it.
Yeah.
Everything's built around it. It's not following trends. It's not what this person's doing. It's, I'm doing this because of this. So I feel that my job is to discover and develop talent, even if the people at the time don't recognize the talent in themselves. I see rock stars in everybody.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think, when you bring somebody in, I mean, there's a lot of debate, it's like, oh, we're going to pay a consultant, all this money, and we know what we're doing. But the fact is, when you bring in that different perspective, like, when we would, the first time we ever went through a long range strategic plan for our organization, it was incredibly eye opening. And, there was a lot of stuff that we did know, but there's a lot of stuff that it never crossed our minds to do some things the way, it was suggested through the long range strategic plan. So, I think people really need to, embrace the fact that bringing somebody in and being able to offer a different perspective is incredibly beneficial for, their business, whether it's a single entrepreneur or whether it's a huge organization. So I love what you guys are doing in that regard. So how can people get a hold of you guys? Where, what are the website addresses? How do they, engage you guys?
You can check out the Rockstar Media Training Program, be part of the band over at allthingsrelaxstudios.com. You can also follow us on IG at All Things Relax Studios as well.
Cool.
And you can check out the podcast, All Things Relax with Sandi D podcast. I might as well plug the show too. That's where Sandy's the host. I produce.
Absolutely. Yeah. Take Thanks, the opportunity, Dan. For sure.
Thanks, man.
So we're just about out of time. Is there anything we didn't cover? We covered a huge array, but anything that you want to throw out there that we didn't talk about?
I just think, like I said before, I think what you guys are doing is really inspiring. And I think that it's gonna it's gonna put ideas in people's heads like, okay, yeah, I mean, hey, I get it. I get the corporate world. I get it. The touring was almost like a corporate job. It was just changing cities every day. I get you gotta do the job, but man, you only have one life. And if you're in a position where you can take, maybe it's not 2 years, maybe it's a month, maybe it's 2 weeks, whatever it is, but really go out and do that thing that you've always wanted to do. Go to that place, start that, skill, whatever it is, because no one ever looks back and says, oh, I should have spent more time in the office. I should
That's
have
right.
done 60 hours instead of 50 hours in the office. But if your dream is to go travel somewhere, then do it and just enjoy it and live that rock star life like you guys are.
Yeah,
Yeah, man.
no, and it's so
Yeah.
true. And we have this conversation with a lot of our other full-time RVers that we've met on this journey so far.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them had mentioned as they were kind of telling us about their story of going back and forth. Do we do it? Do we sell everything? Don't we do it? They finally came to the conclusion that what, we're never going to be as young as what we are today. This is the
Right.
youngest we're going to be for the rest of our lives. So why wait?
That's true.
And
Right.
we've met so many people, um, you know, that have wanted to do this, and then for whatever reason they couldn't. I mean, a lot of our friends since we've left, sadly have passed away.
Oh,
Um,
I'm sorry, man.
I remember, one of them, as we were getting ready to go, he was telling the story about, yeah, when we retire, we're thinking of doing the same thing. And then, sadly lost his life through COVID.
Oh, man. Wow.
Prior to, I lie, about 3 months before he was scheduled to retire, so he never had that
Wow.
opportunity. And it's just reiterated, that we're doing the right thing, that we're out there, living our lives and gaining these
Yeah.
experiences and just absolutely loving it. So, um,
Yeah.
love, love when we can talk to people who get it and can relate
Yeah.
to it. And they're like, hey, I'm inspired by what you're doing. So, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool for sure. So that brings me to my final question. And as you
Yeah.
know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places. And it comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go,
Mm-hmm.
when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So what's one of the little things that G does on a regular basis to make the world a little bit better place?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I mean, like on the business side, showing people how to have confidence and everything is one part, but I really think what I do for my part is that I sit back and watch people, and I can spot talent. I see talent in people that, like I said before, they may not see in themselves, but I think it really takes like you know, sometimes like you ever sitting at a pond and you see like the swans, the ducks on the pond, right?
Mhm.
And it appears to everybody else that that swan or that duck is just gliding on the water, right? But reality underneath the water, that duck is working its I won't say it, but working its butt off to get where it is. So it's like, if we realize that with everybody that we come in contact with, every business or anybody who's trying to do something, is that they're really working their butt off to get where they want to go. It's important to have that support and just have that encouragement and someone say, you know what, you're on the right path. Just keep doing it. Look at that duck. You can do it.
Yeah.
No one on the surface will see all the hard work you're doing.
Right.
That's the reality. And you can put it up on social media. I'm so good because I'm doing hard work. No, they're never going to see the real hard work. All they're going to see is the gliding. But just knowing that you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing, and you're not having to speed across the pond. I mean, it may take a while. It's a lot of movement, but it's just having that forward momentum really makes everything change. I think, like I said, with you guys taking that step, that leap of like, this is what we're doing. It's that first step. So if I can help people take that first step, if I can be there for them to say, hey, don't worry about this. You're doing great. Don't worry about the likes and the follows and all that on IG. Just get your message. If this is who you are, then just really embrace who you are, and we'll be there to support you.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that, reiterates what we said earlier about when you go to a concert where, the people there are it's just like the duck. They see the glider.
Yeah.
The people there just hear great music. They don't put it together that there were sometimes upwards of 200 other people that don't get on the stage that made that show happen. Yeah. So I love that. And I think we all do need to have somebody who can just see something in us that we don't see. So I love that for sure. G, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. For those out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. And be sure to swing over to Amazon, pick up a copy of my latest book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1 as well. G, again, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope we run into each other down the road for sure.
We will. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. Cheers.